Hello, I'm in the middle of chapter 7 of the Leviathan, where Daryl is on riding the Medusa and trying to come down. And if she's not careful, she's going to land on rooftops and really hurt herself. So I'm going to start on the paragraph right before I ended last time, so that way we can get some recollection of what was happening in when I ended yesterday. Darren's clutched. Darren clutched the ballast cord, gritting her teeth. She might survive the wind toss landing herself, but the shingled rooftops and backyard fences below would shred the creature to pieces, and it would be all Darren Sharp's fault for not warning the groundmen when she had the chance. Some air sense she had, she thought. And so she's coming down, and she doesn't want to come down and ruin the Medusa, the hot air balloon that she was trying to control. She didn't want it to get into onto rooftops or onto fences and just ruin the whole thing. So it was her job to get it down safely, and her job to tell the guard men that she was coming down. Okay, Beastie, she called up. I may have got you into this mess, but I'm going to get you out of it too. And I'm telling you, now's not the time to panic. The creature made no promises, but Darren pulled the ballast cords away. The bags snapped open, spilling their water into the storm. Slowly the air beast began to climb. The ground man gave a cheer and set up the winch, ferociously hauling the air beast in against the wind. The captain was supervising, shouting orders from the back of the all-terrain carriage. The tigress looked miserable in the rain, like a pair of house cats standing under a faucet. With a few more turns of the wince, the Medusa was over the proving ground, safely away from the prison smoke chimneys. But when the wind switched directions, the air beast billowed again, pulling in a half circle toward the other end of the scrubs. The Hexley let out a screech above the wind, like the horrible sound when one of Dodd's air bladders would spring a leak. No, Beastie, we're almost safe, Darren shouted. But the Medusa had been tossed about once too often. Its gas bag was connecting the tentacles, coiled as tight as rattlesnakes. Darren Sharp smelled the hydrogen spilling into the air, the scent like bitter almonds. She was failing, but the wind still carried them, changing direction without rhyme or reason. It tossed the air beast about like a crumbled piece of paper, pulling Darren behind it. They had to be heavier than air by now, but in a gale like this, Darren fancied you could fly a bowler hat on a bit of string. At the other end of the cable, the ground men were watching helplessly, the flight captain ducking as the gyrating cable sliced overhead. If they tried to crank her any closer, they'd pull the air beast straight down into the ground. Jasper was running across the field toward her, cupping his hands to his mouth and shouting something. She caught the sound of his voice, but the wind wiped the words away. Darren's feet now dangled a few yards above the ground, which raced by as if she were on horseback. She peeled off her heavy sudden jacket and tossed it overboard. The prison loomed close again as the Huxley sped along. Smashing into all walls at its speed would turn her and the air beast into bloody splotches. Her fingers scrambled at the pilot's rig, searching for a way to escape the harness. Darren reckoned her chances were better dropping up out onto muddy grass than crashing into a wall, of course. And with her weight gone, the Huxley would rise back into the air. So she was thinking if she jumped, the Huxley had a better chance to survive. Of course, that Clark rag of a coxswain's hadn't bothered showing her how to unbuckle the rig. The leather straps were swollen with rain, as tight as a duck's bum. Eventually, the service didn't trust recruits not to wiggle out in a panic and fall to their deaths. Then Darren saw the knot over her head, the cable that bound the air beast to the ground. She looked at the cable stretched out between her and the winch, about 300 feet of it now. That length of rain-soaked hemp had to weigh more than one skinny wee lassie and her wet clothes. If she could set the Huxley free, it might still have enough hydrogen to carry her up to safety. But the ground was rising again, shining wet grass and puddles blurring past just beneath her feet. The prison walls ahead, reaching up with one hand, Darren felt the half-familiar shape of the knot. It was nothing but a backhanded mooring hitch. She remembered Jasper telling her how air service riggers used sailors' knots with the same ones she tied 1,000 times on Dawes' balloon. As Darren struggled to free the wet cable from its knot, her boots struck the ground with a bone-jarred thud, skidding across the wet grass. But the real danger wasn't below. It was the approaching prison walls. Darren and the Huxley were seconds away from smashing into the shining expanse of wet stone. Finally, her fingers pushed the cables working end free. The knot spilled, the rope twisted like a live thing, skinning her fingers as it slipped from the steel ring. As the weight of 300 feet of wet hemp dropped away, the air beast soared, clearing the prison walls with yard to spare. Darren breathed. Her breath caught as a bleaching chimney passed beneath her feet. She imagined the raindrops tumbling down its mouth to the coil fires below, spitting steam, the sparks rising up to ignite the angry mass of hydrogen over her head. But the wind whipped the sparks away. Moments later, the Huxley had cleared the southernmost prison buildings. As she climbed, Darren heard a hoarse cheer from below. The groundmen raised their arms in triumph. Jasper was beaming, cupping both hands to his face and shouting something that sounded congratulatory, as if to say she'd done excellent, exactly what he told her. It was my barking idea, Jasper Sharp, she muttered. It was my barking idea, Jasper Sharp, she muttered, sucking her rope-burning fingers. Of course, she was still in the middle of a storm, strapped to an irritable Huxley, both of them soaring across a stretch of London with precious few spots to land. And how was Darren meant to land this beastie? She had no way to vent hydrogen, nor more ballast in case the creature spooked, and no clue if anyone had ever free ballooned with a Huxley before and lived to tell the tale. Still, at least, she was flying. If she ever came down alive, the Boffins would have to admit as how she passed this test. boy or not, Darren Sharp had shown a squick of air sense after all. She was pretty proud of herself. She got that Huxley down on her own, probably maybe the first to ever do such a thing without harming it. It's a pretty proud moment, and the groundmen and Jasper, her brother, knew. Chapter 8. The storm felt strangely still. She remembered the sensation from Dawes' hot air balloons. Cut free from its tether, the Medusa had exactly matched the speed of the wind. The air felt motionless, the earth turning below on a giant lathe. Dark clouds still boiled around her, giving the Huxley an occasional spin. But worse were the flickers in the distance. One sure way to set a hydrogen breather aflame was to hit it with lightning. Darren distracted herself by watching London pass beneath all matchbox houses and winding streets, the factories with their sealed and smokestacks. She remembered how Daw had said London looked in the days before old Darren had worked his magic. Old Darwin had worked his magic. I'm going to read that again. She remembered how Daw had said London looked in the days before old Darwin had worked his magic. The pall of coal smoke had covered the entire city, along with a fog so thick that street lamps were lit during the day. During the worst of the steam age, so much soot and ash had decorated the nearby countryside that butterflies had evolved black splotches on their wings for camouflage. Imagine that. Lots and lots of smoke during that time. But before Darren had been born, the great coal fire engines had been overtaken by fabricated beasties, muscles and sinews, replacing boilers and gears. These days, the only chimney smoke came from ovens, not huge factories, and the storm had cleared even that murk from the air. Darren could see fabs wherever she looked. Over Buckingham Palace, a flock of strafing hawks patrolled in spirals, carrying nets that would slice the wings off any aeroplane that ventured too close. Messenger turns crisscrossed the square mile, undetermined by the weather. The streets were full of draft animals, hippoesque and equine breeds, the elephantin dragging a sledge full of bricks through the rain. The storm that had almost snuffed out her Huxley had barely slowed the city down. Darren wished she had her sketch pad to capture the tangle of the streets, the beast and buildings below. She first started drawing up in one of Daw's balloons, trying to capture the wonder of flight. As the clouds gradually broke apart, the Huxley slid across a staff of light. Darren stretched in the warmth and set a scorching water out of her cold, damp clothes. The houses below were getting smaller, the teeming umbrella tops blurring into the wet streets. As it dried, the Huxley was climbing. Darren frowned. To descend in a balloon, you vented hot air from the top. But Huxleys were primitive ascenders designed to be tethered at all times. What was she supposed to do? Talk the beastie down? Oi, she shouted. You there. The nearest tentacle curled a bit, but that was all. Beastie, I'm talking to you. No reaction. Darren scolded. An hour ago, the Huxley had been so easy to spook, perhaps one annoyed Lassie's cries didn't amount to much after the